What's up everyone, happy Friday and welcome back to the channel. This week we're continuing along with the 1-bar solo builds and we're going to go over my version of a stamina nightblade using a 2-hander. Just like the past few weeks, this build is primarily meant to be used in solo content like world bosses, arenas, public dungeons, and soloing dungeons, so keep that in mind as we continue along. So first and foremost, we will want to play as a dark elf, an orc, a Khajiit, an imperial, a redguard, really any race that is stamina based. The other races will work fine as usual, but if you're looking for the most optimal setup, I would obviously suggest using a stamina race. All of our attribute points are going to go into stamina, and then for our Mundus Stone we'll want to use the Thief. If you prefer a little bit more penetration, you could go with the Lover instead, but with all of my testing, the Thief feels better, so I would suggest that as a first option. For our food, we'll want to be using Artaeum Takeaway Broth for maximum sweatiness. You could also use Dubious Camoran Throne as a cheaper option, but something like Lava Foot Soup isn't really going to cut it, since we aren't using any of our attribute points towards health. Sugar Skulls or Crown Food would work in a pinch, but the recovery is very important, so if you're able to, be sure to just use the better foods if you can. And regarding potions, you can just use the Tri-Restoration potions, since you probably have at least 74 billion of them sitting in your bank. So our gear is going to be slightly different this week, with our two sets being Order's Wrath and Zovgin's Warband. We won't be focusing on spamming heavy attacks this time around, so Sergeant's Mail can kind of take a seat on the bench this week. You can craft Order's Wrath in the High Isle zone, or have someone else craft it for you if you don't have access to the DLC. And Zogvin can be looted from the Frost Vault DLC dungeon. So we're going to want to wear Order's Wrath on our shoulders, hands, legs, belt, and feet. These can all be medium, with one heavy piece on our shoulders, so we can take advantage of the Undaunted passives. And then our other set, Zovkin, can go on our chest, 2 pieces of jewelry, and then a 2-hander like a greatsword, or maybe a maul if you want more penetration. For a monster piece, we'll be using a light Baron Thirsk's helmet, and if you don't have access, you could always use something else that gives you recovery like Magma Incarnate or Bloodspawn. And then as always, our mythic is going to be the Oakensoul ring. All of our armor should be in divines with max stamina glyphs, our jewelry all in bloodthirsty with weapon damage glyphs, and then our weapon can be precise with a poison glyph. I like to mention for anyone who may be watching the channel for the first time, if your gear isn't fully upgraded to gold, you can still complete most content, and you shouldn't feel like you need to wait to get down and dirty until your stuff is all maxed out. So just save up materials and gold as you can, and enjoy the game in the meantime. Your stats will improve slightly as you get everything maxed out, but it's not the end of the world, and anyone who tells you otherwise probably hasn't touched grass since 2019. If you don't have access to the Frost Vault dungeon to get a hold of our second set, some possible alternatives could first of all start with Vicious Serpent. This one gives us some critical chance, Minor Slayer, which Oakensoul already gives us, some extra damage, and then reduces the cost of stamina abilities and restores stamina to us when we defeat enemies. On top of all of that, it also grants us Major Expedition after defeating enemies for 8 seconds, giving us a nice speed buff. This set can be looted in the Aetherian Archive, Helra Citadel, and Sanctum Ophidia. A very basic OG set that could work here too would be Hunding's Rage. This is just a craftable set that grants the wearer some extra critical chance, some max stamina, and a damage buff. The Briarheart set from the Hrothgar Overland would also be a decent substitution, granting some critical chance, max stamina, and when you deal critical damage, your weapon and spell damage gets increased for 10 seconds. And also during this time frame, your critical strikes will heal you back. Hexo's Ward is another great set for solo content. This one can be looted in the Deadlands Overland and grants some critical chance, some extra damage, and when you deal critical damage, you'll get a nice fluffy damage shield for 6 seconds, and it can occur every 7 seconds, ensuring an almost constant shielding. I won't go on with too many alternative sets this time, but you get the idea. There are probably at least 10 other sets that would work here if you don't have access to the DLC, and most of them will work fine. You may also find that your personal playstyle calls for something slightly different, so be sure to play around and feel it out for yourself, and just make any customizations that make it more fun for you. Moving over to the champion point section, you can place whatever you'd like in the craft section. As always, I like to have super fast mount speed, so I usually tend to slot War Mount, Gifted Rider, Steed's Blessing, and then Rationer. If you like the abilities that give you better treasure or that kind of a thing, then go for those instead. It's totally up to you in this area. The blue section will be including Master at Arms, Deadly Aim, Reaving Blows, and Fighting Finesse. And then over in the red section, we're going to slot Boundless Vitality, Bloody Renewal, Bastion, and Strategic Reserve. This setup is basically meant to give us a bit of extra health and health recovery, some stamina recovery when we defeat enemies, and then buffed up damage shields. If you prefer something in place of Bastion, you could always use Celerity for a speed buff, or maybe Fortified for some more armor. Our passive skills should be maxed out in all of our class abilities. The two-handed skill line, all 3 weights of armor, and you'll want the Undaunted passives, all of your racial passives, and anything else you like from Alliance War and Craft. Moving over to our skill bar, we're going to start with Reverse Slice. This is an execute ability that damages all nearby enemies rather than just a single target, which is why I prefer this over Killer's Blade. If you'd prefer single target, you can just make that swap if you'd like. Next up, our mobility / debuff skill is going to be Lotus Fan. This will damage an enemy, apply some damage over time to all enemies in the area that we jump into, and then also apply minor vulnerability to them for 10 seconds, increasing their damage taken by 5%. If you don't like this skill or don't want to be using a mobility skill, the best swap for this slot, in my opinion, would probably be Merciless Resolve to be used as a damage steroid. Our third skill will be Carve. We use this to apply bleed to our enemies in front of us, stacking up to 3 times for a nice duration of bleed. It also provides us with a damage shield when we use this skill, so we can always recast it to apply shielding. Our next slot is going to be Razor Caltrops in order to keep things very passive and simple. We just throw this out to debuff enemies with Major Breach and get some damage over time as a bonus. Alternatively, Surprise Attack would work here too, which deals some damage and applies Minor Breach to a single enemy rather than in an area. This skill would essentially be our spammable, weaved in with some light attacks and the occasional heavy to restore stamina, and will be a slightly sweatier setup compared to Caltrops. And then our fifth skill is going to be Leeching Strikes for the same reasoning as Razor Caltrops, and that is keeping our playstyle passive. This causes our light and heavy attacks to give us health and stamina back, with a nice chunk of stamina when the effect ends before we reapply it again. Alternatively, Swallow Soul would be a good passive healing ability that deals some damage over time if you're looking for a more active setup. And our ultimate is going to be Incapacitating Strike. This is a powerful attack that also grants us some resource recovery while we use light and heavy attacks, as long as our enemy has a negative effect on them, which they usually will. Now, the alternative setup here would have you swap out Lotus Fan with Merciless Resolve, Razor Caltrops with Surprise Attack, and then Leeching Strikes with Swallow Soul. So if you decide to take this route, you'll also want to swap in Thaumaturge and Biting Aura in place of Master at Arms and Reaving Blows. Both setups work very well and have very similar results out in the field, so it's really up to you in the way you actually like to play the game to pick which version you'd like to use, or make further changes outside of my ideas. Alright, so the basic premise here will be to pre-buff with Leeching Strikes, throw out your Caltrops, jump in with Lotus Fan, carve 3 times, and just repeat that with lights and heavies mixed in to kind of recover stamina. When the enemy gets low, I usually like to wait until about 25 or 30%, start slamming them with Reverse Slice. And during fights, be sure to reapply Leeching Strikes and your Caltrops. Be sure to use Lotus Fan to apply minor vulnerability, and keep your damage shield up, and keep your bleed damage stacked with Carve. If you struggle with Sustain, be sure to use your potions and mix in the occasional heavy attack to get some resources back. Alright, here's a few little clips that I recorded just to show what this kind of looks like in action. Nothing too crazy this week. And thanks for watching as always. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. We're already over 500 subscribers in the first few months of videos, which is pretty crazy because I was originally just making some build videos to kind of document setups for myself. I wasn't really expecting anyone to take notice, but I appreciate everyone's support, and we'll see you soon for some more ESO content and spooky stuff during the weekend. See ya.